What's up guys, welcome back to another video. In this one we're going to be clearing up some really bad apologetics made by multiple Christians recently on social media platforms like TikTok, YouTube and others. This involves the claim that around 230 AD, so around 100 years before Nicaea, there was an inscription that calls Jesus God. And this somehow was meant to undermine those who believe that the Trinity was a developed doctrine that was eventually crystallized at around 325 AD during the Council of Nicaea. But in fact, this shouldn't be treated as some revolutionary discovery, as I will soon explain, God willing. Without further ado, let's play the video by Capturing Christianity to allow him to make the case that this is somehow groundbreaking.
Of northern Israel, buried beneath the grounds of an old prison, archaeologists have unearthed what could be the most significant discoveries, one of the most significant discoveries since the Dead Sea Scrolls. An ancient mosaic inscribed with God, Jesus Christ. This incredible artifact dating back to around 230 AD is the earliest known archaeological evidence of Christians proclaiming Jesus as divine. Now, let's think about this for a second. This predates the Council of Nicaea by almost a century, which means that early Christians weren't just like whispering about Jesus' divinity in like back alleyways. They were embedding it into their very own worship spaces. Unitarians and others who reject the Trinity often argue that the doctrine of Jesus' divinity wasn't actually part of the earliest Christian beliefs. They claim that it was something that sort of evolved over time and then was later formalized by church councils under political pressure. But this mosaic complicates that argument in a pretty big way. So today we're diving into the history, the implications, and why this discovery might actually reshape what we think we know about the early church. Investigate it further. All right, so now let's talk about the importance of the God Jesus Christ inscription. The three ancient Greek inscriptions were found on the mosaic by excavators and were deciphered by Dr. Leah de Signy. The Western inscription is the most noteworthy of the three. It reads, "The God-loving Akpatus, I can't do this, has offered the table to God Jesus Christ as a memorial." Besides the earliest archaeological declaration of the Christian church's belief that Jesus is God, the message also states that a Akpatus was the donor of the table used for the local Eucharist celebrations. The reason the statement God, Jesus Christ is so significant is that arguments have been made by critics that Jesus never claimed to be God and that the first Christians did not recognize or believe Jesus was divine. Skeptics argue that belief in the divinity of Jesus developed later as Christianity got further away from the actual events of Jesus' life. Finding this early evidence that Christians did believe Jesus is God reinforces the credibility of the Bible. It also reinforces the credibility of Trinitarian views of the Bible.
So the first thing we must understand is that we have written attributions to those before this time where Jesus is called God. We must also recognize the fact that God is a very loose term being used at the time of these biblical authors and the early church fathers. Paul calls Satan God in 2 Corinthians. In Psalm 82, the judges in Israel are called gods. So knowing this, we can make a distinction with being called God in a lesser sense and being called God in an absolute sense, with the qualities of being all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-powerful. Jesus himself makes this distinction by calling the Father the only true God, and in this way we can make this distinction between the true God and those that are lesser gods. Now that we have a grasp of the notion that God can be used in different senses, let's now look at the early church members who titled Jesus God, but in a lesser sense. We have Tertullian, Origen, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and many others who all titled Jesus God before 230 AD. So there's nothing groundbreaking here. In fact, because we have writings from these individuals before this inscription, it can help us understand why this doesn't prove the Trinity. Tertullian calls Jesus God and yet believes there was a time where the Son did not exist, which goes against the fact that Jesus is eternal. Origen calls Jesus God, but makes it very explicit that he meant in a lesser divine sense than the Father. Justin Martyr calls Jesus God, but says he is another God besides the Father who has a lesser divinity. Obviously, in Trinitarianism, Jesus is meant to be the same God as the Father and is meant to be co-equal. Irenaeus calls Jesus God, but makes it clear that the Father has more knowledge than the Son because Jesus said the Father is greater than him. He also says that you can't possibly call Jesus the true God because you can only call the Father the true God, and he evidences this by using John 17:3. With all this in mind, this inscription really doesn't prove Trinitarianism any more than it proves subordinationism, which is the idea that the Son is a lesser God than the Father who is not co-equal with him. We have a more historical basis to prefer such a view of subordinationism due to no one preaching the co-equal and eternal nature of the Father and the Son before the time of the inscription, and we actually have more records of those who were modalists than Trinitarians. Actually, a modalist would have more of a historical claim to this, as possibly referring to Jesus being God and identical to the Father, than a Trinitarian making a claim here of Trinitarianism, of there being three distinct persons and one essence, due to the fact that we do have historical evidence of modalists at the time, but we have no evidence of Trinitarians. Trinitarianism is a later developed doctrine that Christians today read into the text of the Bible. The Bible doesn't teach it, nor do the early church fathers before Nicaea teach it. This discovery has zero impact to holding to such a position that the Trinity is an involved doctrine, because calling Jesus God is not sufficient to prove someone is a Trinitarian. Does the inscription tell us if Jesus is capital G God, being co-equal and co-eternal with the Father? No. Does it tell us whether the inscriptor believes Jesus is not identical to the Father? No. So stop grasping at straws with these sort of weak arguments and actually try to prove someone before Nicaea taught the Trinity historically. If you can't find anyone, then I will logically infer from this that Jesus historically never taught the doctrine of the Trinity. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to go the extra step, my GoFundMe and Patreon links will be down below. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.